Welcome to the Trumpet of the Last Few Days. I'm Stanley Farrar.
And I'm Robert Farrar.
And I'm Joshua Farrar.
Joshua Farrar.
Let's see. Insert something witty and quippy here. We can
Are you
assume
sure
that I won.
Are you sure they're equipped to handle that?
Well, I thought it'd be good to take and not obsess over the corruption in our own election system this week.
It is kind of
Because
old news.
I've been watching the them presenting the evidence to the legislatures, and this is worse than a banana republic.
But interestingly enough, the U.S. was always behind the banana republics anyways. So...
Well,
I know what you guys are talking about, but I still just imagine the store in the mall.
Let's just say that the U.S. fought a series of wars called the Banana Wars to establish favorable governments in various different locations to help facilitate trade.
Well, we'll put it this way. Putin and Xi Jinping had more honest elections.
Tell that to Navalny.
I don't know about
Venezuela and Cuba had more honest elections than
Venezuela and Cuba, maybe. But Putin's. Remember Putin's last election?
I do remember Putin's last election, and it was more honest than this one.
With a 95% rate of people voting for him?
They had more people voting in this election than there were people registered to vote.
There was for his, too.
At least we haven't reached Robert Mugabe level yet.
Maybe not.
80% of the opposition voted against him, and he still said he won. And the reason we know 80% his opponent won 80% of the vote is because he said it.
Well, according to the most recent polls, with a poll that skewed heavily Democratic, the majority of it has now reached almost 50% believe that it was that the Democrats stole the election,
and it's going up all the time. But we weren't supposed to be talking about this, so let's segue into a different.
We did say specifically that we weren't going to talk about this.
Well, this is no. I'm going to use this as a segue into the other topic.
Oh, okay.
Every totalitarian corrupt regime fixes elections, but every totalitarian and corrupt regime wants gun control. Gun control is the cornerstone, because if the people can't fight back, then they can do whatever they want. But if the people can fight back, then there's a catch on their power. That's why America has the Second Amendment, so that we can take and throw out corrupt regimes.
Mm-hmm.
That's why Biden and the Democrats and the communists want to take and eliminate guns from the United States. The problem is with a 3D printer and a few steel parts, you can build your own.
The hardest part is building the rounds.
No, actually, the rounds are easy. You just need a press.
Well, you just need a press to put the rounds in the casings. The hard part is getting the the smokeless powder.
Oh, no, you can buy it.
Not in Europe, you can't.
Yes, you can.
Really?
Yes, you can.
What do they use it for?
A video I watched recently, put out by the communists, by the way.
Yeah, I saw that video, but it didn't say anything about where he was getting the smokeless powder to.
He got it online.
Fair enough.
But the restrictions that they have restrictions on is on the ammunition. They don't have restrictions on the component parts for the ammunition.
I still think building the rounds in their casings from scratch the very first time would be the hardest part.
Well, maybe the very first time, but
Once you got it rolling, it becomes the easiest part. But when you're starting everything from scratch,
well, you just have to take and press a new primer into the case. Measure your powder, pour it in, and if you can't get smokeless powder, you can still use black powder.
yeah. But notice I
Uh,
said smokeless powder. Black powder is easy to make.
yeah, and then once you've got those, you just simply press the round into the casing and until it's to where it's firmly seated. And you can do that with a gun with a bullet press, but you could also do it with a simple vise. I have seen people do it with a metal sleeve slid over it and a rubber mallet. As long as nothing's hitting the primer, it's totally safe.
But what I'm getting out of this is you want a 3D printer for Christmas.
Start trafficking arms into Europe.
Well, that's just it. You don't have to traffic the arms into Europe. You only have to traffic the designs.
Which, through the internet, isn't that difficult.
Isn't difficult.
Yeah.
So the build your own weapon culture has become so popular in California that they started regulating ammunition because there's no law against building your own firearm.
And of course, if you've built your own firearm, there are no serial numbers. It's untraceable. There's no way to determine where it came from or how many of them there are.
That's right. And that's what terrifies California. That's what terrifies the big government people all over the world because they don't know how many of these ghost guns there are.
And with things growing increasingly totalitarian all over the world, we may see those ghost guns get broken out every so often.
Yeah.
Now I grant you that with they've not had very many good successful runs of 3D printed rifles,
Mm-hmm.
because if it's shooting rifle rounds, it's got a lot of power behind it.
Well, so there are there aren't two major different types of 3D printers, but there are two different types of 3D printer nozzles and formula. One of which is designed for creating plastic and one of which is designed for creating metal. The thing about the metal 3D printers, though, is that you have to replace the nozzle that's used to place everything with every use. So it becomes rather expensive. But that's really only for more the heavy duty stuff anyway.
Well, the plastic ones will actually build most of the light firearms that'll shoot pistol calibers.
Yeah.
Like the video that I sent you, that guy's got a short rifle that's shooting 9mm bullets.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Now, that particular firearm you couldn't legally own in the United States without a special license.
Well, sure you can, if you make it yourself.
No, even owning it after making it yourself, it's illegal. The barrel's too short.
Ah.
Now, if he had have taken and had a barrel that was at least 18 inches long, then it would be totally legal in the United States.
Why the differentiation?
Because they don't want a firearm that has a stock that can be braced against the shoulder, that is short, that has a barrel shorter than 18 inches to avoid legalizing sawed-off shotguns.
Ah.
Which, what's the point of a sawed-off shotgun anyway? I never have figured that out. Other than ruining your aim.
You don't have to aim. You got a wide scatter, and you're shooting buckshot, so you're shooting a bunch of 32 caliber bullets at once.
It's to make it compact enough that you can store it just about anywhere, so that when you pull it out for an emergency situation, like say someone making trouble in your or trying to rob your business, you don't have to aim. You just have to point and shoot, and they're dead.
And you take a short-barreled rifle with a 7-inch barrel. If it doesn't have a permanent backstock on it, it's classified as a pistol in the United States and is legal.
Which I've seen people make those too.
But if it's got a permanent backstock on it, then it's a short-barreled rifle and it's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you can brace it, it improves your aim, and being short-barreled like that, you can hide it in your coat.
I'd
rather
seen...
have a Tommy personally, but
I don't think that the current technology would hold up to a Thompson.
yeah, well, but if you're gonna hide a gun in your coat, a Tommy would be much more ideal.
Well, semi-automatic, you have more control over the rounds. And with pistol rounds, you have the ability to take and, well, kill just about anybody. There's a reason why the military does carry 9mm pistols.
Yeah.
Because 45s are expensive.
I grant you that when I was in it, we carried 45s. But, and we drilled with those 45s.
They do primarily use 9mm now, though.
Yeah, that's because, well, you have to understand, they tried to convert to 9mm before I went in. And after about 1,000 rounds through, they were blowing their slides off.
That's no longer an issue. They've improved the pistols enough for that.
Anyway, as long as there is people who can take and access firearms, you always have the possibility of an insurrection. That's the reason why during World War II, the original Liberator was invented and airdropped over France. It took and had in its 5.45 rounds, caliber rounds in its handle. It could shoot one bullet at a time, and was made out of sheet metal. And it was designed so that they could, that the French could take and walk up to a German, shoot him, take his gun.
Well, with 2 interlocking pieces of pipe, a nail, and a cap, and a shotgun round, you can make a shotgun very, very easily that is extremely disposable and untraceable.
Yeah, that's a zip gun. Gangs have been using those for ages.
See, the problem is, though, the French revolutionaries were basically useless during World War II.
Yeah, they were. But the idea was, they thought that if they were armed, the general public would rise up and fight back.
Unfortunately, they were French, so of course they didn't rise up.
And a lot of them actually supported the Nazis, believe it or not.
Yes. That's the reason why after the Nazis fell, the women who supported the Nazis were shaved bald, had swastikas and tar marked on them and paraded through the streets. I don't know what they did to the men that supported the Nazis.
Welcome to France.
They also whipped them.
The men may have gotten the Nuremberg treatment.
If they survived the retaking, because if they really supported the Nazis, chances are they fought with them.
Yeah, true.
The Nazis needed somewhere to keep replenishing their troops.
Yeah, they may have joined the German army, but in an agreement that the Germans wouldn't bomb their historic sites, it's France surrendered.
So instead, they get the British to bomb their historic sites. And the British are like, yes, let's do this.
My. The British-French rivalry.
It's only been around for hundreds of years.
Robert, could you adjust your mic a little bit? You're breathing into it when you laugh. That should be better.
It's only been around for hundreds of years.
We could.
Well, it's true.
Oh, gone.
But the notion of a totalitarian government surviving an armed populace, their odds go down greatly.
I mean, the odds of a totalitarian government surviving are already pretty low. So,
well,
now,
under that argument, the odds of any government surviving is pretty low.
Once you make a guns illegal, then there's no reason not to make full automatic firearms.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, I mean, what do you have to lose?
They're a little more complicated to make, but you have nothing to lose. You might as well make them.
If you really don't want to go through the effort of making them, then you can just get a bump stock.
Now, see, yeah, and those are controlled in most places too, but you can print them.
Yeah.
So, speaking of lethal force, Josh came across some interesting statistics here recently.
Yeah, I was watching something and they mentioned death rates throughout certain areas. So I got curious and started doing some research of death rates over the past, well, actually since 1950. And there were some interesting trends that I found. Like, for example, the change in death rate from 2019 to 2020 is identical as of the time of recording, or just about identical, to the change in death rate from 2018 to 2019. And in fact, the trend of death rates hasn't changed in the slightest for about 5 years, or well, for more than 5 years or so. Little over 5 years. There was a brief spike around the time that Black Lives Matter came around, which was an interesting thing. And there was a spike in the upward direction around, well, when transitioning from 2007 to 2008. Before that, it was on a trend downward. But
so basically, when you elect Democrats, people die.
Yeah.
And these are all UN statistics, by the way.
Yeah, they were pulled directly from the United Nations. But it goes to show you that coronavirus hasn't even been a drop in the bucket for death rates. because it didn't raise them in the slightest. Didn't change the general trend whatsoever.
Interesting thing is that with coronavirus, the flu stats went down.
Interesting how that works.
Well, they found that if you have the common cold, believe it or not, you actually are less susceptible to getting the flu. Now,
Well, that's because it blocks off the methods that you normally receive the flu.
Well, and it actually bolsters your immune system, so your body kills it off so much faster.
Okay.
They wanted to see if it would do the same thing with coronavirus, but I wouldn't be surprised if having coronavirus wouldn't do the same thing, because the normal coronavirus, is a cold virus.
Well, they said back in January and February that if you had the coronavirus, you could not get the flu and vice versa.
So
Well,
we need to be spreading the flu around. Gotcha.
The thing about it is the people that die from the flu are the same people that die from coronavirus.
Yeah.
Except evidently, if you're an asthmatic, you're statistically less likely to get coronavirus.
Which I think is fascinating.
It's something about inflammation of the airways.
So if you're 30% less likely to get a coronavirus as if you're an asthmatic, and you're 26 times less likely to get coronavirus as if you have type O blood, then I have more than 50% chance of never catching it.
There were a lot of interesting little factoids that I found while digging through these death rate statistics from the UN. Like it mentioned death rates from certain things, like congenital heart disease is still the number one cause of death worldwide. But they had a chart where they broke it down to who it was affecting. It was basically a T-chart like this, but with female, male, rich, poor. And they had all of these things graphed on the chart of who they affected most. And the biggest killers were mostly in the middle area. But you had things like breast cancer, which was up here on the female side, and you had prostate cancer, which was down here on the male side. And they were both about the same size and affecting the same general populace. But here's the weird thing. Lung cancer primarily affects males who are wealthy.
Interesting.
Breast cancer and prostate cancer didn't care whether you were wealthy or poor. Alzheimer's primarily affected women who are rich.
Really?
Yeah.
I wonder why.
That explains a lot with Pelosi, don't it?
Now, other things like sickle cell and those sorts of killers massively affected just the poor. In fact, interestingly enough, most causes of death that are genetic almost overwhelmingly don't affect the rich whatsoever and only affect the poor. There were a lot of little interesting details in there.
See, I would have thought that things like hemophilia would affect primarily the wealthy.
Most of the ones that are actually problem ones, like namely the top 50 causes of death, only affected the poor if they were
Well, see, the thing is,
if they were
hemophilia
genetic like
doesn't
that.
actually kill a lot of people, and the rich people can afford the clotting agent.
Okay.
It's not to say that the rich people don't get those diseases, but those diseases being a cause of death overwhelmingly affects the poor.
Okay.
Just like,
I can see that.
according to the same statistics, the death of children ages 0 to 5 is practically non existent in the upper wealthy bracket. Yet it is larger than the deaths 60 and up in the poorest bracket.
This is
Which isn't
worldwide,
surprising.
right?
This is worldwide, yes.
Yes, we'd be considered under the rich category.
They had it broken down into 4 categories, actually. There was the extremely poor, there was the lower middle class, the upper middle class, and then the extremely wealthy. But that was a different chart than the one that I was mentioning before.
Did they bother to take and point out the where different countries fall in this spectrum?
They did if you used the right menus, but I didn't bother looking through every single menu. I did find out that Latvia has the highest death rate in the world right now.
Why Latvia?
I don't know why. I just found out that they've got. So the death rate is measured in a little bit weird. It's deaths per 1,000, or average number of deaths per 1,000 people in a populace over the course of the year. The United States currently sits at around 8.7. Latvia stands at around 14.6.
That's a lot of deaths.
Yeah.
What did they go through?
Oh, it's just
Are we
little.
behind the loop on our world events right now?
This is just little bits of information that I did research on briefly.
The interesting thing is that when Black Lives Matter and Antifa were burning the cities, is a South American took and was talking to an American and said, "I don't understand why all these rich people want to burn down their communities, and
No, that was Occupy Wall Street.
no, okay,
And they were like, why are the rich people protesting? No, the rich people aren't protesting. What are you talking about? These are the poor people protesting against the super rich. No, no, no. It's America. All of you are rich.
and compared to a lot of parts of the world, he's right."
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's very relative. That's not counting the cost of living.
Well,
True.
I forget what the average income is a day, but I think it's the average for the entire world is less than $1 a day.
Yes, but the average cost of living per day is also less than $1 in most parts of the world.
Yes, it is.
It is
yes,
not. It's closer to what, 40, 50 times that in the States.
Yeah, but the states also have a really high standard of living. A lot of people own multiple cars. A lot of people have a house that they can't afford, but they buy it anyway. Really, to be honest, I mean, people say America's rich. Really, America's just in debt. Almost everyone's in debt.
Yeah.
The wealthy are the few.
The truly wealthy. Because there are a lot of people who live wealthy lifestyles who don't actually have a dime.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Well, let's face it.
One of
A lot of
the
the billionaires.
Oh, go ahead.
A lot of the billionaires are in extreme debt.
I always see a comment of these wannabe socialists who don't really know what they're talking about, and but it's specifically targeting Jeff Bezos, right? Because a lot of them like to point fingers at Jeff Bezos and say, "Why are you evil?" But
Socialists attacking socialists? What?
I don't think he's evil. I think he's amoral. But regardless, um, they point fingers at him and say he is worth such and such amount of money. If he gives such and such amount of money to every person in the world, he would still have such and such amount of money left over.
No, it wouldn't.
That I'm saying what they say. I'm not saying what is the reality. The reality is very different because there is a difference between your net worth and your liquid assets. Your net worth is a combination of your liquid assets plus the worth of everything you own. So, what is counted in Jeff Bezos's net worth is his liquid assets, the cost of every home, every piece of land, every branch of his company,
Well,
and
it's not a
what
private
they are
company,
worth.
is it? Does he
It is a
actually?
private company. Amazon is a
Is it?
private company.
Oh well, then yeah, every bit of the company then.
Yes. So every single bit of the company counts into that net worth. So if Jeff Bezos were to liquidate all of his assets, which would take a huge amount of time and really wouldn't be possible, then he would have around the money that they claim he does. If he were then to give all of that to a certain number of people, he would have just enough left over to maybe be a beggar in a shed starting from scratch.
Well, we figure if there's 7 billion people in the world, there's
8
no
billion
way
at this
any.
point. 8
What?
billion now.
8
8
billion.
billion now.
Okay. Then there's no way that anybody on the face of the planet could afford to go around handing out huge sums of money to everyone.
Yeah, not a single person in the world could pull that off.
So it's a ludicrous concept. Um, Now, I will say this: if he's amoral, he's evil.
Yeah. He also is a socialist, Josh.
Yes.
I don't understand is why so many successful businessmen are socialists.
Because they want to be part of the ruling oligarchy.
Because their companies would be some of the first things the socialists are going to destroy.
I think they understand socialism as the way that Robert just described, because they know that certain companies will always end up on the top, running everything after a socialist revolution, and they intend to be that one company. They forget that most companies disappear in that process.
The
And then
government
usually
takes over those companies.
Yes.
Yes, and usually the companies are destroyed and some obscure company will be taken over by the government and brought up as the company.
Mm-hmm.
Such as that one billionaire from Mexico who bought all the telecommunications network.
Well,
were
the
socialized.
He was the richest in the
the-
world for a while there too.
Yeah, he was until Bezos took it.
Yeah.
when you stop and look at what does socialism attack, well, they are always talking about the bourgeoisie.
Bourgeoisie.
I
Yes.
can't even say
Bourgeoisie.
it. Bourgeoisie.
Bourgeoisie.
That's who they attack.
Which
Well,
is the
that's
middle
the
class, by
bourgeois.
the way.
There's the
The
middle
burgers.
class. It's the burgers. It's the one who runs the businesses.
They have to topple the businesses to establish a non-capitalistic form of government.
Mm-hmm.
And historically, our family has always been a burger family. And we're not talking about the food.
So If I ever end up having kids, I will make sure my branch of the family is the bacon cheeseburger branch. Uh,
For those of you who don't know, in the English feudal system, so you've got various different terms based on which feudal system you're dealing with.
bourgeoisie
But
comes from the French, by the way.
yeah, bourgeoisie comes from the French feudal system. In the English system, you had the peasantry and the serfs on the bottom. Above them, you had the free merchants who were called the burghers. And then you had the various different forms of nobility, the barons, counts, etc.,
Barons,
princes,
counts,
kings,
dukes,
dukes.
that sort of
But
thing.
at the beginning of the feudal system, there were very few burghers. Most people were bonded to some sort of lord. Our family was an exception because Ferrars historically were horseshoe makers who also acted as basically vets for horses. So they wouldn't be bonded to any specific lord, so that they could travel between the lords and do their veterinary business, so that the armies could be up and running.
And then one of them managed to marry into nobility, and the rest is history.
But eventually, as peasants gained wealth, they were able to buy their freedom more and more, and the burgher class continued to grow and grow until it toppled the feudal system. Essentially, what communists and socialists want to do is they want to destroy the burgher class so they can reestablish the feudal system with them on top.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a concept that's insane, is what it
And it's
is.
always billed as creating a classless society, but it always creates a rigid hierarchy.
Yeah, there's always a class society. In fact, in many ways, America, by its very nature, is a classless society.
It's the closest thing to a classless society. The only classes we have are, well, your
Artificially
financial
constructed.
classes, lower
Well,
class, middle class, upper
even the
class.
financial classes, you could rise up into them or out of them, depending on the flow of business.
Well, that's
That's true.
because, well, see, true capitalism allows a flow between the rich and the poor. Socialism stops that flow and keeps the rich rich and the poor poor.
Hmm. Well, they have to have a slave class, otherwise it doesn't work. The You take a look at China, you look at the Soviet Union, they all have their slave class. In China, they're throwing people in jail and using forced labor. Why? Because they can work them for nothing. Um,
Well, and then you have the Uyghurs.
they're the ones, some of the ones that were thrown in jail for no reason.
Yeah, but
Um,
any dissidents too, and etc.
that's one thing that the the one guy who was making illegal guns in Europe stated was if they had have had guns, they couldn't have done them that way.
Yeah, and it's true.
um, but the Soviet Union had their gulags, so they would throw people into their gulags to work them to death.
The Nazis had their
Um,
concentration camps.
California, uh,
The Italians had
the
their ghettos.
California had Kamala Harris.
Kamala Harris, she would keep people in jail beyond their time to be released so that they could work them for free. So she might be a person of color, but she's ran the criminals like slaves.
Standard socialist stuff.
Standard socialist stuff. And grant you, she's just living up to her ancestry because one of her ancestors was a slave owner.
I would say that she's just living up to her ideology as a socialist.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But
I don't hold enough credence in your ancestry to think that decides what you do.
I don't either.
Yeah, I know. I haven't shoot horses ever.
I have. I have. I've shoot horses.
Nor do I know the remotest thing about diagnosing a horse's illness.
I know a little bit about that too. I'm not a vet though, but
Either way, we're just horsing around at this
anybody
point.
who's dealt with horses any length of time has to be able to take and identify what's basically wrong with them to figure out whether it's something you can take care of or if you need to take them to a vet. Because you can go down to the store and get penicillin and such for veterinarian purposes.
Which is ironic considering doesn't horse meat make you immune to penicillin?
Yes. Actually, what it makes you immune to is the alternatives to penicillin.
I was pretty sure it
Why?
makes it to where you can only use the alternatives.
No, no, no. That's a problem that my granddad ran into. Is that he's allergic to penicillin
Mm-hmm.
He was.
and he's dead now. But anyway, the problem came in when he was younger. He was put into a position where he was eating horse meat, and therefore he couldn't take the alternative to penicillin anymore because it wouldn't work on him.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of immunity, by the way, they've actually done some tests on. They looked at some blood tests that were taken not this past March and April, but the year before that, 2019. And they actually found antibodies for the coronavirus in that blood, in those samples of blood, proving that coronavirus has been in the US a lot longer than they thought. Which honestly, I've always thought they kind of overblew that because, I mean, we've known it's been in for a long time. We knew China covered it up. But people are making a big deal out of it right now.
When it comes down to it, China took and there's evidence that it took and was released in China probably a year before they let anybody know about it.
Now
I still
they're
wonder what
blaming just about everyone else for it because it's convenient.
I still wonder what their actual death toll is. Because there's no way they're giving us the proper numbers.
Oh, come on. Their death toll comes up and it just flatlines. There is no up and down.
I don't know if the death rates that I just researched have anything to say about it. I don't think it changed much at all.
With China's medical system?
Yeah, with China's medical system, I don't think it changed much. I think they're still primarily dying of other diseases.
Well, yeah,
Or in
primarily.
But
childbirth.
you know it's got to be a comorbidity, though. You know it's got to play a factor.
I'm not saying it hasn't killed people. I'm just thinking that it's a drop in the bucket compared to other things like infant mortality.
Ha ha ha. Their infant mortality is partially due to other reasons, and just because they ended the one-child policy doesn't mean their child problem suddenly ended. Most Chinese people are still only having one child because they can't afford to have another child.
Well, that's what happens when you only live on $4 a day.
If even that. But China is also renowned for having the worst air quality in the world.
Yes.
So you know
and people dying from that is not dying from the coronavirus, even if it's in their system.
They also tell you don't drink the water in Shanghai because you catch diseases from the water, hepatitis and various other things.
We may or may not know someone who got strep, a rare form of strep in China.
A flesh-eating one at that.
I forgot about that. Yet he still sings the praises of China.
And it makes no sense. he took and it was he's the one that told me you can't take ice because the ice is contaminated with diseases. You can't drink the water because it's full of diseases. You can't breathe the air because it's polluted.
But it's a great place, and it has 3 levels of street sweepers just to make sure that everyone has a job.
It takes and has no freedom. It's
Scams everywhere.
they're crooks. They take people. They take in one moment tell people, okay, we'll give you your property, and then they take it away from them and tear it down so they can resell it. They there is a nothing but corruption. They charge people a tax. Like, oh well, we'll take and put this tax on to pay for the dam, and then they take and continue taking and charging them the same tax for 10 years beyond the paying of the dam. It's big governments require tons of money.
And a slave class that is their people.
Mm-hmm. There's nothing good about China. They're trying to get right now. They're trying to set up churches to Mao,
which is interesting for an atheistic regime.
Well, they can't get their people to stop worshiping God or the gods, depending on the area.
Because Buddhism has never stopped.
Yeah. So they take and
for those who say that Buddhism is atheistic, has clearly never seen your typical Buddhist practitioner.
Yeah.
But with that being the case, they are trying to substitute a new religion to replace it, and it's the religion of the emperor.
Back if it was Japan, that would be back to Shintoism, wouldn't it?
Yes, it'd be back to Shintoism in Japan or the imperial cult of Rome. As it is, they're only trying to get him to worship Mao because he's the founder of the Communist Party in China, and therefore he is their god.
Until Xi decides to put up a statue of himself, and then, next thing you know, they have their own pantheon of communist dictators.
And we're back to the paganism of Rome all over again.
Except I don't know if they're going to put their male lovers.
Or more specifically, the paganism of Egypt.
Because that's what one Roman emperor did.
He did what?
One Roman emperor had a statue of his male lover put into the pantheon.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that.
Because it's Rome, and Rome is depraved. It was depraved. Actually, Rome still is depraved.
And people think Caligula was the worst one.
They took and talk about that. If you read ancient Roman writings, they talk about how effeminate and perverted the Greeks were.
They got just as bad.
And they got just
the Greeks
as bad.
did it first.
Think about it. Every society, after it embraces and accepts homosexuality, has collapsed.
Well, every society that's rejected religion has collapsed.
That's true too.
And it's true that every society has collapsed and will collapse.
Now, the thing about it is that the homosexuality is illegal in Russia.
At least they got something right.
And they talk about. I was listening to a Jew recently complaining about the evils of Sharia, and he was going through and he was naming off the fact that they stone homosexuals, they stone adulterers, they stone thieves, they stone people who commit blasphemy.
Oh, sounds a lot like the Torah.
And it sounds exactly like the Torah. As he was listing off everything he mentioned, the Torah, which he's supposed to be following as a Jew, says to stone people for.
Well, not for thievery, actually. Thievery, they were supposed to pay back with, with
With
plus stuff.
interest. Yeah.
Well,
Also,
what it boils down to is 90% of these arguments from a moral high ground. They don't actually care what the moral high ground is. They care what seems popular so that they can browbeat people with public opinion.
though I have heard a slight variation to the stoning homosexuals.
They
And
throw them
that's
off
throwing
buildings.
them off buildings.
It's like somebody was talking to one Middle Eastern leader, and they said, "How can you claim there are no homosexuals in your country?" He says, "You saying there are homosexuals in my country? Do you know where they are? Can you tell me who they are?"
I'd love to know.
One of the things they warned us before getting ready to go to on a med tour was to watch out for the Muslims because they were homosexuals.
There was something in the news recently about a high profile Muslim politician who just got busted for a gay sex dungeon.
They warned us to be very careful because you could be raped by the Muslims.
Because as far as they're concerned, it's not homosexuality if they're a heathen.
Or if you don't get married to them.
Now, if you don't take and submit voluntarily, it's not. They didn't consider it wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's why I've often said that instead of that we were far too passive in our fighting the Middle Eastern wars, we should just turn them to the glass.
On that cheery note, if you like today's episode, feel free to hit the like button. If you disliked it, feel free to hit the dislike button. If you think that we should have taken a harder stance on the Middle Eastern wars, feel free to leave your opinion down in the comment section down below. If you disagree and think we should never have been there in the first place, or if you think that we should have been there but don't think we should have been that harsh, feel free to disagree too.
Hey, we would have lost a lot fewer people.
Remember to ring the bell so you can get notified whenever a new episode drops, and until then, we'll see you next time.
Oh,